Let's start with you, Matthew, because families facing £8,000 New Year tax raid. That's what's on the front page of today's Sunday Telegraph. What do you think? Do you think that tax rises are an inevitability at the moment and something that we just need to get over?
Before I start, and I will, this isn't me avoiding the question, I just want to congratulate Ben. I think it's very easy to, kiss backsides and say the right thing to get on in politics. And I think it's the right thing to totally ensure any political party is democratised and that there's an ability to either elect or remove a leader. So I congratulate him on that. And he's sort of borne fruit because of that. With regards to taxes, that's okay. With regards to taxes, I think it is an inevitability. And I think the reason people are annoyed is, and I called it out, I think maybe on your show during the election, in that neither the Conservatives nor Labour were truthful on what their plans were for the economy. Both parties, both main political parties, said they would not increase taxes, but they would neither cut public spending. And unfortunately, in the economy that we're currently living in at the moment, one of those two is inevitable. And I think public services, in a way, can't afford to be cut any more than they are, which is why we're left with the situation of raising taxes. But when you go around saying, oh, we're not going to raise taxes on working people, whatever that means, a lot of people are going to be annoyed with you. And
why then hand over £10 billion in pay rises to the public sector? I mean, if I think that is the contradiction, the anomaly that people get so annoyed about, because had there been some public sector pay rises, which I think most people agreed they deserved something, then perhaps that would have been easier to swallow than saying, right, we're going to give 10 or 11 billion pounds to the public sector, and train drivers and a lot of workers that are really well rewarded as things stand, but then turn to everyone else in the private sector and say, but by the way, you're going to be clobbered with tax rises because they're absolutely necessary. Do you not see why that's a complete contradiction?
I see the argument, and I think I do have sympathy with Labour's argument of these strikes in certain public sector occupations have been going on, for the best part of 5 years, if not longer. And there did have to come a point where this ends. So will it be worth it in the long run? You'd have to hope so. I think the reason people also get frustrated, though, is that I travelled back to Stockport yesterday to come and see the family for the Christmas period. And I think the annoyance with me is you're giving public sector pay rises out, some of which I think, that goes to show if you're in a strong trade union, you'll do all right. And I think there's an argument there to ensure everyone's in a trade union. You might do well out of it. However, that travelling on the train is still a totally miserable existence, and we're not seeing a improvement on the public services that are currently all over the show. The same for anybody that goes into A&E or is waiting for an operation. Now, these things do take time, but unfortunately, Labour aren't blessed with time nor patience, because unlike 2010, where the Conservative and Liberal coalition factored in we might have to be a little bit unpopular, we've had 14 years of it. Therefore, there is no patience, and people voted for what they thought might be change. And at the moment, I think they're probably feeling shortchanged even more than what they were.
Okay, well, Ben, I'll let you respond to that. So, I mean, I see it as perhaps a bit of a contradiction that, okay, on the one hand, we've got to end all these strikes by throwing billions at the public sector, but then we've got to tell everyone else, well, actually, it's going to be really tough, and you've got all of these tax rises coming, and actually, even this morning, Bridget, the supply teacher, saying, actually, sorry, no, you're going to be happy with some of these tax rises and VAT on private schools. I don't think those two things align.
No, I mean, the problem we've got is that we're catching up with the hangover of all the money printing that took place, first of all, in 2010, and then the money printing that took place during the lockdown period in order to lock us up. And I think it was about 250 billion spent to save the banks in 2010 and 500 billion to lock us up at home during the pandemic. So government borrowing went through the roof. And of course, when government borrowing goes through the roof, government gets strained and government has no no option but to start taxing us. And one of the biggest iniquities, I'm slightly digressing, but I think it's worth making the point, that one of the biggest iniquities of the money printing that took place in 2010 was that money was used to rescue the very people that created the problems. The very people that caused the crash of the banks included, were bailed out. And the working and middle classes, who survived mostly from one paycheck to another, saw the value of the pound in their back pocket devalued by commensurately with the amount of money that was printed. Of course, if you print money, the value of your pound in your back pocket depreciates. So the working class and the middle class have been hit very hard for the last 15 years as a result of government actions. And wages were not keeping in line with inflation. We now have a median wage in this country which is about 25% below what it is in the United States of America. And that is an unsustainable position where you've got continued high inflation. And we've had inflation in this country for a long time before the inflationary spike in 2022, after we opened up, because of the damage done through lockdowns and so on. And so I've got sympathy with people wanting larger pay rises, but what the government has to do is marry up the desire to pay people more money with cost savings. And there are cost savings that can be made without any pressure on the people of this country. For example, we should ditch net zero, which by the Treasury's own admission, their own statistics, is costing the country 50 to 60 billion pounds a year, at a time when we just can't afford that.
All right. When we return, we'll find out whether Matthew agrees with that. And
there's a lot more I can say.
Yeah, I bet there is a lot more that you can say, honestly. I mean, I can just let you go until I will tell them to take TalkSport off at 1 o'clock. Actually, is TalkSport on today at 1 o'clock? Yes, it is. OK, so when we return, we'll find out whether that is a good plan. And also, let's make the point as well that the very black hole that we claim that we're in as a result of all of the spending that went on during COVID, Labour supported. And so, therefore, it's I can imagine that also sticks in people's craw, that you have the Tories spending all this money right, left and centre. You didn't have Labour opposing that. So I don't know where you would go if that is something that makes you angry. So we'll return to this conversation right here, live on Talk. We've not really gone past tax rises, actually, at the moment. That seems to be all that's on anyone's mind today. But again, Matthew, tax rises being inevitable and Labour telling us that they're fixing the foundations and all of this stuff. It was foundations that broke, that they supported. They supported all of the COVID spending. The biggest financial issue that we face today is paying back the debt from COVID. There wasn't one word of objection from the Labour benches when it came to the money being spent on COVID. Quite the opposite. They were actually wanting the government to go further.
I think there was an element of Keir wanting to go further. I think I was involved with the party at that time, and listen, I just think there was a lot of fear at that time, and I think for me it felt like a war footing in that, you've got to believe that the government have got the best intentions at heart during these, what I hope will be sort of a once-in-a-lifetime event. And in a way, what were we supposed to do? Not pay people furlough and just expect them?
Not once did anyone from the Labour benches say to the government, is lockdown the best thing financially? Have you done a cost-benefit analysis of how many people will be saved by lockdown versus how many people might lose their lives as a result of lockdown because of businesses closing and the economy
and the long-term
going
effects.
wrong, and the long-term effects and the long-term effects of mental health? They could have widely supported the government, but they never once even asked the question. And by the way, it's not just the government that failed on that. Journalists failed miserably on that. So again, can you...
And the inquiry right now is failing to ask that very question, Cristo. No one's asking that question.
So do you not see again how it would stick in people's craw that we're hearing such easy nonsense from Keir Starmer saying that it's terrible and the foundations didn't need it fixing and all of these financial problems? They contributed to those financial problems by voting through legislation which has put us where we are today.
If people remember that sort of stuff, I think the majority of people I know were sort of grateful. In fact, they thought Rishi Sunak was the best thing since sliced bread because their livelihoods had been effectively saved, particularly those that were self-employed and didn't know what they were going to do. I think there's obviously arguments that will come out as they have done during sort of post-pandemic. I think at the time, I didn't think about the effect it would have on people's mental health. I was totally fed up and depressed and inside, like everybody else. But at the same time, for me, I'm no scientist, and I thought you should believe the experts. And from what we were told, people like Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance said that the lockdown was the way to go to protect the NHS, essentially, which lots of people obviously wanted to do. I think what stuck in people's craw more is being told to do that, which many people did, but then having a government that didn't do that at the time.
Well, yeah, but that's because I think it's now, perhaps that wasn't the best advice, and that, Chris Whitty and all of them, I mean, I'm surprised they live their lives at a level where they're able to leave the house without caution.
Hindsight is a wonderful thing, believe me.
Yeah, but that's the thing, but we're allowed hindsight. We don't elect those, they're in the top jobs, they're not allowed to have hindsight. We put them in the top jobs because they're supposed to know.
But a lot of people knew at the time. The Great Barrington Declaration, do you remember that?
Yes.
4,000 leading scientists and epidemiologists
and they were all pilloried
across the globe said we must not lock down. This is not the right approach. Even the WHO at the beginning said lockdowns weren't right. They came round to support lockdowns, but to start with, they said they weren't right.
It was backside saving.
And even in March 2020, we knew it affected the elderly and the vulnerable. The vast majority of us were going to be fine. And we panicked, and we took our lead from a totalitarian Chinese regime in their response to the virus they created. What we should have done was stick to the principles of Western governance, and our civil liberties should have been protected. People should have been given the choice.
But unfortunately, we had a Prime Minister at the time, in Boris Johnson, who had no ideology. Like, again, if you'd had someone like Corbyn, again, I'm not a Corbyn fan, but at least you would have said, right, to lock down, those decisions come from someone whose ideological belief is in a massive state and in the state encompassing everything. There would have been logic to say, OK, I don't agree, but that's the ideological framework of what he's doing. If it had been Thatcher, Thatcher's ideology was freedom. Again, she would have said, well, no,
Absolutely.
My ideology is keeping people free. That's what the framework for how we deal with COVID. But because we had Boris, whose ideology was whomever was stood in front of him at the time, that's why we had actually no framework, and that's why he blustered from one side to the other. We're locking down, we're not locking down, we're closing schools, we're not closing schools, because actually he was completely the wrong Prime Minister.
Having joined up political philosophy is absolutely vital for every political party. They must understand what it is that drives them, what it is that's going to drive their policies. A framework. So when they're presented with a problem which they haven't seen before, they have a framework through which to answer it. And I'm sad to say that a lot of modern political thinking is just knee-jerk reaction to the last 24-hour news cycle.
Absolutely right. But also, it's a very interesting conversation, but also I think that we've got to hold some responsibility to the 24-hour news cycle, because we now have politicians that are reactive to, we need a statement. We have journalists that need something new every hour. In the time of real ideological politics with Thatcher and the like, you had to worry about the 6 o'clock news, the 10 o'clock news, and the 1 p.m. news.
Now they're worrying about it 24/7.
Now they're worrying about it every day. These 5 o'clock press conferences, we must have something new. Oh, okay, today, masks. It was led by the press conference and needing to say something rather than led by whether masks were the right thing. So it's all got quite perverse. Matthew, I want to give you a chance to respond as well to Ben's comments on actually if the Labour made better decisions about what it is they're spending money on, i.e. Ed Miliband's blank net zero check, the 2030 target that we have on various things. I mean, Nissan, employing thousands of people, I think is absolutely on the brink at the moment because of the fact of this 2030 electric car thing. Would it be a wiser decision, rather than taxing us into oblivion for these things, to ditch some of these policies?
I think ultimately, I hate to say it, but taxes will always be inevitable regardless. And I think whether it's net zero or otherwise, I think where Labour has really gone wrong, and I've said this before, is government is about political choices, and particularly about tough political choices, and you're going to have to do things maybe you don't want to do. But I think for the money raised by the winter fuel allowance cut, the inheritance tax policy against the farmers, and no, that's it. So those bring in £1.5 billion. If you had put up corporation tax by 1%, that would bring in £7 billion. You're bringing in 3 times the amount. Now, both are taxes, and both, will cause people some concern. But what you wouldn't get is the political optics of a load of city boys in their barbers protesting outside the House of Commons.
Okay, but why net zero? Why not get rid of net zero? Or why not get rid, if you are in favour of net zero or in favour of good environmental policies, which I think a lot of people are, why make it so extreme? Why make the rush to it so quick, which of course costs more money?
I think because time is of the essence with things like climate change. I am no climate scientist, but from what experts say is that man-made climate change is real. It is a thing. It is something that's coming down the traps. I do think, and I agree with you, that you need to bring people with you on this sort of stuff, and you need to make it affordable for them, which is why I always thought, whatever you think of the ULEZ scheme, Sadiq Khan should have brought forward a more generous scrappage scheme. Not everybody can afford, a brand new electric vehicle. You need to give them time.
Or not brought in the ULEZ scheme.
Possibly, but if you were
that's
to take...
my money that's doing that scrappage scheme. I don't want my money spent on a scrappage scheme.
It's more state spending, more borrowing, more taxation.
I'll just finish your sentence, then I'll let Ben. I'll let Ben. We're restraining Ben at the moment. But yeah, just finish what you want to say, Matthew.
No, I think, listen, there's a lot of things I didn't want my taxes spent on over the last 14 years, but such is life, unfortunately, and this is the government that we've got. I think with that said, if you're going to bring people on this journey with you, you have to encourage them and incentivise them, otherwise you turn them off. I think anything that's going to create jobs is useful and good. Anything that moves us in a direction whereby we're not heating the planet is probably good. And ensuring that we have a balanced market of energy. I think there is a place for hydrogen, there is a place for wind and renewables. But I think the danger is that you're going to cost people more money in the short term, and they're going to be put off doing anything in the long term.
All right, what do you want to say to all of that, Ben?
Well, we all focus on taxation and spending, but the other area of government policy is the making of regulations. And anyone who's had the smallest brush of trying to set up their own business, be a sole trader, run their plumbing business, whatever it is, will absolutely, it'll resonate with them when I say that we have become a ridiculously highly regulated society. Everything from rent controls to the logs we need to keep of the ethnicities we now employ, the number of people on the board of directors that come from different ethnicities, whether or not there's an ethnic wage gap, allowing people to work from home, making that a legislative obligation that employers need to make that available to their employees.
Yeah. Why would you bother nowadays? Why would you bother?
Absolutely. All these regulations are a burden on business. They're a burden on wealth creation. They're a burden on the individual in this country. And if you have high regulation, high taxation, you're going to kill the private sector. And ultimately, it is the private sector and it is the people working in the private sector that drive the economy, that create the wealth to pay the taxes. And it's no surprise to me that the GDP is flatlining. And actually, GDP per capita has been going down for the last 12 quarters when you take immigration into account. I think this country is not just facing a recession next year. I think we could be facing a sovereign debt crisis.
Do you... I got a bit emotional earlier, Ben. I mean, I've got to be really quick now because I feel like our British value of aspiration is actually being slightly eroded. And it's really upsetting.
Aspiration's been killed. The feeling, it's the most important human feeling we have. Getting up in the morning and feeling, thank goodness I'm alive, what can I do today? What is my life going to hold for me today? If that aspiration is driven out of us in this country, and to a significant extent it has been, you will see the end of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I'm really worried for the first time about where it is that we are. Listen, Matthew, thank you so much. Oh, he's there. We thought we'd lost you, but thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Ben Habib, as well. And thanks for your candour over everything with reform as well.